And just like to pass it over to you, Reiko. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Reiko Takeda. I teach at Seijo University in Tokyo, and I mainly work with students who want to study abroad. And in the program that I teach at, I have a study abroad preparation course for which I'm responsible. And this paper that presentation that I'm giving today, Critical Incidents with or Without Instruction, came from the results of the study abroad preparation class that I teach. So I'd like to start. First of all, we're all familiar with the term culture shock, and the definition of culture shock has evolved over the years. One of the older ones in 1986, Furnham and Buckner say that they are value differences caused by contact with another culture, resulting in negative reaction. And then 1995, Pedersen wrote, it's a psychological construct to explain the adjustment process to unfamiliar environments. And then more recently, Neulip in 2018 wrote that it's a natural reaction to the clash of cultures. Now, this is the famous Ucurve by Lisgard in 1955, which illustrates the stages of culture shock. And first of all, start with the honeymoon stage, which is followed by the culture shock phase. In this illustration, which represents the dip, and also when somebody possibly hits bottom for some cross-cultural encounter or difficulty. And then that's when the negative feelings develop towards the cultural differences. And this is followed by the third stage, the adjustment stage, albeit slow and gradual. This is when the individual starts having a little more of a positive outlook. And then finally in the acceptance, or what's also called the adaptation stage, they become capable of functioning in the new culture. Now I'd like to move on to critical incidents. And according to Pedersen, 1995, it's a research method proposed by Flanagan in 1954 to analyze effective and ineffective behaviors in workplaces. And critical incidents or critical incident methods, anecdotes describing effective and ineffective behaviors in foreign environments in cross-cultural situations are gathered. And then based on a real life situation, and typically involves a dilemma for which there is no easy solution. And critical incidents have been studied in other disciplines. For example, in hospitality, according to Swanson and his associates, 2014, Chinese guests reported on critical incidents that were based on failures of relationship, socially based failures. Whereas with US guests who stay at hotels, they don't talk about the socially based failures, but they report more on the loss of economic resources, loss of time, loss of money when it comes to hospitality related critical incidents. And then also teacher education, Ishihara in 2012 used the term critical narratives, but what she found out that the critical narratives or the critical incidents that the English teachers who are Japanese English teachers reported, they reported the pragmatic failures, and what that did is that it helped them develop their pragmatic development in the English language. Now, going back to international students, there are critical studies on critical incidents involving students in the UK, according to Kim, 2018. And what these students reported is that what they did is coping with explicit cultural elements involves less difficulty, such as buying daily necessities, food, and taking public transportation. That's much less intense. compared to the next one, which is involvement with deeper cultural engagements. But just because one has a deep cultural engagement, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to help them transform their values. Now, when it comes to critical incidents involving Japanese students, according to Kosaka in 2019, he studied critical incidents of Japanese university students who visited English-speaking countries, and his most recent research involves those who visited Asian countries, and he found out there's a difference between those two groups. And according to the second group, those who went to Asian countries, what they reported is that they made it sound like Japan to appear more advanced than the Asian countries that they visited. In what areas? For example, when it comes to manners, what the students reported is that the host country, the host Asian countries, manners appeared less civilized, according to what they wrote, appeared less civilized compared to those in Japan. And adapting to those same Asian countries required the Japanese students to downgrade themselves. This was one example was using the toilets in Asian countries, because it's nothing, it's not like the ones that they're used to in Japan. Now, why critical incidents? This is something that I started to focus on a couple of years ago, because after I attend the post-sojourn presentations that my students after my students participated in the short-term programs, and a lot of times they report what's odd and funny that they experience in the host country. But there must be something beyond the odd and funny that they experience, is what I thought. And then also a lot of times the students in their post-sojourn presentations, whatever they experience, the cultural experience they have, they will also only say it's a cultural difference between Japan and the other country. And I wanted them to go beyond that. So I started incorporating critical incident instruction, but I'm still figuring out what would be an effective way to get the kind of learning that I want to, I'm expecting from my students. And the benefit of using critical incidents is that it allows students to observe cross-cultural situations more objectively, and it helps them become aware of their values and expectations, and it allows them to develop strategies to deal with cross-cultural situations in real-life situations. Now, the purpose of this study is to understand the short-term program participants' critical incident experiences. And as I said earlier, I'm exploring ways to have students write deeper reflections, because I'm still looking for an effective way to teach critical incidents in my study abroad preparation class. And the methods that I used are, I worked with two different groups. The first group was a group of 24 students who participated on a short-term program in the US, and I went with them. And after their return, I worked with each one of them and had a 20-minute interview. And they were all enrolled in my study abroad preparation course, and they all received critical incident instruction. And the second group that participated in my study was a group of 35 students who went on 3 different short-term programs, and they wrote their open-ended reflection after their return. And not all of them were enrolled in my study abroad preparation course. So what I did is, prior to their departure, I attended the last informational session and gave out a handout and explained critical incidents. And for this presentation, I'd like to focus on the second group, on those who did not have the extensive critical incident instruction that the first group had. Okay, some results from their write-ups. The student who went to France, a female student who went to France, wrote, As the French eat more bread than rice, I was surprised that rice in France was different from that in Japan. The rice I was able to eat in France was long grain rice, which was not like the Japanese sticky rice. This is the student who went to France. And a student who went to Australia. I was surprised that the cafes at the mall closed around 5 p.m. and I was not able to arrive on time after my classes ended at 3 p.m. As a result, I learned to manage my time so I could go to the mall and shop during store hours. So that's the student who went to Australia. And the next write-up, I was touched by the generosity and friendliness of Americans when I and other passengers help a passenger on a wheelchair get off the bus. None of the other passengers were bothered by the delay this caused. It may be one cross-cultural incident, but it made me realize how I needed to change my way of thinking. So, and this student, when I checked her name, she took my study abroad preparation course 2 years before she went on this short-term program. And actually, I hadn't started the critical incident instruction when she took it. And I'd like to move on to discussions. As seen in results 1 and 2, the superficial experiences result in shorter and less deeper reflections. And taking a study abroad preparation course can help students think deeper in their critical incident reflection, as seen in the write-up by result 3. And also, these students are university students who are ages 19, 20, and at this stage in their life, some students may never experience a critical incident yet. And to them, for some of them, it may be just a cross-cultural difference. And I just have to accept that. And I'd like to conclude with some pedagogical implications. According to Jackson, 2017, length of time in the host culture does not guarantee intercultural learning. And this, I found out that it has to do with both long-term and short-term. For example, as seen in the third student's write-up, she only stayed for 3 weeks in the USA, but yet she had something that touched her during her short-term stay. So just because people are there, students are there for a short term, it doesn't mean that they won't have intercultural learning. Okay. And the next one, and I will echo what Kim writes, that deliberate intervention is necessary, but Kim's paper didn't write anything specific about how to conduct the deliberate intervention or the explicit teaching in the classroom. Okay, so that's what I'm still searching at this point. And I realized that it's important to start practicing in the pre-sojourn stage. They can't be going to the host country and then suddenly be told to look for a critical incident. They have to be trained or have to get used to identifying or sensitize themselves to what a critical incident is before they leave Japan. And then last but not least, I think what's most important is to teach them the ability to put themselves in the shoes of others. And I think that will enhance their ability to understand what critical incidents are. And with that, I'd like to show the references that I cited from, and I'd like to leave this a little longer just because in the other presentations that I've attended, I usually want to take a look at the references, and the reference slide is usually the one that goes by really fast. So I'm leaving this up for another 10 seconds, even though I know it's video recorded. And then finally, I'd like to acknowledge my university for supporting my study. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reiko. That was fascinating. I'd just like to open up to the attendees to give comments or ask questions. We have about 5 or 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
daughter is practicing piano in the background, so I hope it's not so noisy. My name is Jamie Hall. And I teach at Iwate University, and I work in teacher education. And I actually use critical incidents quite a bit in a study. We have a teaching internship in Thailand, and students write critical incidents for that. And then students write critical incidents about their teaching practicum. And I mean, I have found that sometimes like an incident can become critical like a year or 2 years after it's happened, you know, when students look at it in fresh perspectives. And so like I found that in their writing, yes, quite often students don't really write things that are very profound. But if they have a chance to revisit it with others a year or two later, you know, their perspectives can change and the incident can become critical. So do students in your program have a chance to share their incidents with one another after the fact and maybe get a new perspective on them?
Okay, thank you for your question, Jamie. I've just started having my students submit write-ups, so I'm not at a point yet where they are able to share that with each other. I'm still looking really for a way to effectively teach how to how to identify critical incidents. And so you're way ahead of me. So yeah, thank you for your idea about having them go back and look at it in retrospect. I really appreciate that.
And then one last thing is sometimes I share critical, like outstanding examples of critical incidents with the students beforehand.
Yes.
And I've been doing it for a few years, so I have a kind of a collection. I found that to be effective, but I'll let other people ask questions now. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I have done that too, and I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation.
Anybody else? Yes, Noriko. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Reiko, for the interesting presentation and the topic. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the intervention that you give in your SA course, the study abroad student course, that group that you did not present today on. But I was curious what sort of intervention on critical incident you give.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. First of all, yes, the students who take my course, I start with culture shock like I did today, and then get into critical incident instruction. I go through the definition that Pedersen gives in his literature so that they have a more academic understanding of what critical incidents are. It's not something like a reactional or a feeling-based thing that is culture shock. So I want them to give them some kind of more cognitive knowledge about critical incidents. Whereas I'm able to do that with students taking my course for at least 2 weeks, whereas with students who don't take my course, but in the last informational session, when I meet with them who do in the short term, I give them a handout of what I give my students. And I basically give maybe a 20-minute explanation of what critical incidents are and how I want them to identify them, or what to look for in a critical incident. And also the fact that it's not only looking for them, but it's also related to something that I hope they would be learning from the host country, and not only reactive feelings about something negative or something overwhelming that they experience.
Yeah, I wonder if also students might benefit from seeing some examples where they can engage in critical reflection on certain situations that others experience.
Yes.
And then they might be able to provide something similar, like eventually maybe after some more deeper experiences of cultures.
Yes, I agree. And I have done that in my last class. And it's just unfortunate that I chose, I gave them my critical incident write-up example, and I chose food, and I shouldn't have done that because it's more superficial. It doesn't really go deep. So I have to make sure to come up with a different example. And I may go back to the student who wrote the third result today and ask if I can use her example. Thank you very much.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments to Reiko?
Reiko, thank you very much for your presentation. For myself, one thing that I found is I work with a number of different students, like some are returnees and some have never been abroad before. What helps me with teaching some of them is understanding where they are within their development. One of the things I've been trained in is the IDI, so the Intercultural Developmental Inventory. And so you might be sort of familiar with this thing here. So when you understand, like on the continuum, sort of where they are from sort of ethnocentric to ethno-relative zone, that helps me in terms of how I'm instructing them. Because if they're kind of in polarization and I'm expecting or teaching them to be more in, say, like adaptation, I'm missing the mark with them. So that's something that's helped me a lot, is to try to understand where they are and then where they could be led to in terms of the development. So just as a comment.
Yes, you know, thank you, Brad, for bringing that to my attention, because I wrote a paper about a year ago on my study abroad students from that year, that cohort, and I actually used not the IDI, but the DMIS, the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity, which was also developed by Bennett. And the reason why I chose DMIS rather than IDI is that there is another Japanese researcher who has developed, or the Japanese version of DMIS based on her Japanese subjects. And what she found out is that they're different from American subjects versus Japanese subjects, which is why I deliberately chose the DMIS rather than IDI. But thank you for your input.
Was your paper in your references, by the way? Was that paper there?
I didn't use that in my references because it didn't have anything to do with critical incidents.
Okay.
But it's something, yeah, but very briefly, I taught apologies, how Japanese apologies and American English apologies differ. And I used the DMIS to kind of measure how much they understood, going from the ethnocentric all the way to the adaptate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and I would also like to give credit to my professor from graduate school, Professor Noriko Ishihara, who has planted those seeds, yes, in me. So thank you very much. I take this opportunity to thank you.
Great, great. We have 1 or 2 minutes if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I'd like to ask all the participants just to put your hands together or hit the reaction button to say thank you to Rachel.
Thank you.
And if you know, the old professor-student relationship would like to meet, in the chat there is a no.
we did that already.
No, we are already colleagues. No,
okay.
She's just so, you know, gracious, but
that's great.
Yeah.
If others would like to meet, I've just put a link in the chat, which is for the Hangouts have disappeared, but there is another meeting room if you want to go there. Okay, many thanks, everybody.